Hi, Chalice here. Welcome to the show. And I think I'll ask you now to please like, subscribe, and share. So that'll help me. I think. At least I hope it will. Anyway, welcome. The start date is 44350.1915, otherwise known as June 3rd, about 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Because I'm not quite sure which time zones you guys are in, so I'm in Eastern Time. So I wanted to talk to you tonight about some the way things are written in the real estate law textbook. And this one is specifically about zoning. And I printed them out so I could refer to them. But the book is down there, and I made it into a notebook, so it's kind of thick, into a binder. It's kind of thick. So here's the words from the book. Federal, state, and local governments are vested with power to restrict or take private property. Say what? Right off the bat, vested with power by whom? I can tell you the document that defined or framed, blueprinted our government did not in any way, shape, or form allow any government to take or restrict private property. James Madison himself said private property is just that. Private, belongs to the owner, to the exclusion of all others. And that includes the government, and especially the government. They had the biggest problem with the king stealing property. So one of their big pet peeves that they had to correct was making sure that private property stayed in the hands of the owners. And here we go now, saying federal, state, and local governments are vested with power to restrict or take private property. No. And then it says, for the purpose of promoting the health and welfare of the general public. Okay, so we've talked about the so-called welfare clause, and there is nothing in that clause or anywhere else in the Constitution that says it is the government's job to promote the health and welfare of the general public. That is not its job. The general public will promote its own health and welfare. It's not the government's job, and it was well known that if you have a government that does promote the health and welfare of the general public, it will get out of hand, very far out of hand. It'll use that as an excuse for every atrocity, every sin, every evil it will use, because they say it promotes the general welfare of the general public. This is absolutely false. The government has no authority, zero, none, zilch, to take care of the general public. Wow, say that 3 times fast. So, right off the bat, that's the first sentence. And everything that follows from there is derived from that vesting of power that they do not have. And it gets to, we'll continue. The power to protect and promote the general welfare gives to governmental authorities the power to impose on private real property. Maybe I should take these off. To impose on private real property such things as zoning regulations, building codes, subdivision regulations, environmental protection laws, and the power of eminent domain and taxation. Right. So, they claim all of these evils in the name of protecting the general welfare, or the general welfare of the public. And once the premise is false, anything that comes after is automatically false. So it's a false claim, yet they're using it um, to commit these evils and take away your property. Because with taxation, for example, even the building codes and environmental protection laws. Once again, I can't remember if we've talked about laws, but only legislation can make laws. Agencies cannot make laws. They have no authority to make laws, and most all of them don't have any authority to exist in the first place. Certainly not any environmental protection agency. That is just atrocious. So any laws they make are just are oppressive, oppressive, and really they might claim to be a law, but it is really unlawful. It is a law that cannot and does not have to be followed because it can't. It's not an actual law. Only legislation can make laws, not agencies. So environmental protection laws are not really laws. So, but besides all that, and eminent domain. See, there are two parts to eminent domain. Yes, we all know about you've got to pay the fair market value of such. One, who gets to decide that? Well, you take appraisals and things like that. You can get a pretty good guess as long as you can get out of any corruption or any ties or conflict of interest. But the part that nobody mentions, and it is mentioned very clearly in the Constitution, but nobody else mentions when they're talking about eminent domain, is the principle, is the element, is the requirement to have due process. Yes, due process, which means a trial by jury of the peers. And there's a reason that the framers put that into the Constitution, because if George, Willard, and Fred are sitting on the jury, and Al, their government's trying to take Al's land, so George, Willard, and Fred are sitting on the jury and said, well, shoot, if the government come in and take Al's land, they'll come after ours next. So there's no way we're going to let them come in and take Al's land. So this is why due process is so critically important, maybe even more important than the idea of just compensation for your property, because that's just too subjective anyway. What is just as far as compensation goes? You can. So if somebody's willing to pay $500,000 for a quarter of an acre, and if you can sell it for that, then that's your compensation. But you just can't. The only real compensation is what somebody's willing to spend on a piece of property. So, but maybe even more importantly than that is the due process requirement. So they just can't come in willy-nilly and take your land, and most of the time they take your land, your private property, and hand it over to some developer. This has happened. It's been famously happened, or infamously well known. It has happened over the years. I had an attorney client one time who that was all he dealt with was land takings and such by the government, and it was appalling what they do with your land. And really, so that's eminent domain. You need the just compensation, and more importantly, you need the due process automatically. And you should not have to go hire an attorney to come sue them after they've taken your property. That's just wrong. And then the other ones, building code, subdivision regulations. Now, if you voluntarily move into a subdivision that has regulations, then You've known that before you went there. But if you lived in your place and they change the zoning on you, or that they have zoning at all, is it's private property. You cannot have the use of your property restricted. That's just, then it's not private. If somebody else can tell you how you can use your property, is it really your property? See? So um it's, and if you don't follow the zoning, they'll fine you, which is basically another money grab. So fines and fines and fines and fines. And the environment, the EPA is very good at that, piling on like $10,000 a day because you have a drop of you got a drop of motor oil on your ground. So it's they do that intentionally because they know you can't afford it. So you forfeit your property, you move, and then they snatch it for free. Basically, they get your property for free because they come in and claim, oh, you violated this law or that law, and then they fine you in a ridiculous amount that nobody can afford to pay, and nobody can afford to sue. So because they have an unlimited well of money, stolen money from the taxpayers, so the people don't. But okay, so those were those things, and then there's taxation, right? This is the big one. Property taxes. Everybody knows about property taxes, and pretty much no matter which state you're in, they all have property taxes, and they're all that money is taken from you to pay various and sundry things, schools, fire, whatever, police, maybe not, none of which is allowed. If a community wants a fire, then they can gather and they can come up with a plan, and everybody contributes and so on and so forth, and they have a fire protection, just like they used to do back in the old days before the government said, well, hey, that's a boondoggle. Man, we get tons of money from that. They'll collect $100 million for a month of firework and then pay out only $10 million. And then the fire people say, well, we can't promote anybody, we don't get paid very much, and blah, blah, blah. So, and that may be true. But they wanted to pay more money, start looking at the books of those who are paying you and see where that money collected is really going. And the schools too. Public education is another sin that is, they claim for general welfare of the general public. But when this country was formed, and back to all the founders and pretty much everybody, the entire citizenry knew that if the government starts taking care of you, one of the things they'll start doing is public education. And we won't get into where that has gone. But I wanted to stay with taxation. So what happens if you don't pay your taxes, which the property tax, which really is pretty much theft? What happens if you don't pay? Right, you will lose your property. They'll sell it and call it a tax deed sale. And what does that do? They sell it to somebody who will pay the property taxes, and then they will get ownership of the property. Now, how is that anywhere close to being legitimate? I can't see how that is. I cannot see how there is any good in that at all. But that's the way things are written. We should not comply with it. And wouldn't it be great if an entire community or even a county, like you can get that many people, but an entire community says, we're not going to pay your property taxes. And you will not sell the property because you can say whatever you want and claim whatever you want. My name's on the title and you can't take it off. I did not give it to you. So anything else after that is theft. And depending on the value of the property, grand theft. So, but these property taxes are very, very, they're just wrong, evil, and oppressive. Because now, if you have your property and you have the title, it says your name right on there, the title of the property is vested in, you have that title, and you've been granted that property, yet, if you don't follow the extortion of the government, then you will lose that property. They will snatch it from you. And yes, I used the word extortion. I checked the definition in the Black's Law Dictionary, and it says unlawful requirement of payment in order to hold or keep a benefit or to acquire a benefit. So, in order for you to keep your property, you must pay them money. That is extortion, and there is a qualification of unlawful, and there is no legitimate law that allows the county or the state to impose taxes upon your property. That's incredible. It is incredibly oppressive, and so I think we're getting close. So this zoning stuff is, you have your property, you own it, but do you really? They can tell you how to use it. They can make you get off of it. They can fine you if you don't use it in a certain way, and they can take it from you if you don't pay their extortion money. So whose property is it really? Take a look at that, and if you don't believe it, try. See what happens if you don't pay. Look into your county codes and start with your state constitution. There won't be anything in there that allows such a thing. Yet look at your local ordinances and codes. It's fraught. I mean, books, thick books of these codes and such. And really, if it's zoned one way and you want to do something else, like, you want to put a couple chickens in your backyard, so you can have some fresh eggs, guess what? In most places, if you're within the city limits, that'll be a big no-no. You could be fined. And if a neighbor tells on you, you probably will be. So then in that case, again, the question is, whose property is it? Right. So I think that's all for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. It'll be really nice, and I'll thank you so much. And I'll sign off now. This is Chalice saying, as always, stay courageous.